Indeed. Welcome to Commoner Law Group special presentation with Mindy Pechenuk. We're going to be delving into the question of classical music and its philosophical development alongside of what we have learned about American law, American sovereignty, and really the American way as it was designed to be by our founding fathers. If you're like me, public school education was kind of lacking in the sense that I wasn't taught so much about the underpinnings, necessarily the philosophical underpinnings of what it means to be an American and why we have the American form of government, which ensures rights to people, and that we have God-given rights, and that government is by the consent of the people, that the order of authority is first God, his creation, that's you and me, and then government is there to serve us. And when the educational system has failed us, it's no surprise that we don't know really about the history of what happened at the time. It was a European and an American phenomenon across the continents here, that men and women were looking at how do we govern ourselves if we don't have to have a king or queen. So, there was the French Revolution and the American Revolution. And so revolution was definitely in the air during the 18th century. And then the experiment has continued to this day to discover what we, the people, can do for ourselves, that we don't need an authority, an oligarch, a king to tell us what to do. And as you know, we at the Commoner Law Group have been spending years now educating people on these fundamental rights so as not to lose the principle of American sovereignty, the principle of the people governed by consent. And so tonight we're going to learn about how classical music, the famous names that you know, like Mozart and others, how classical music was developed over time. And there was quite a bit of controversy, just as there were amongst the more political, philosophical spheres. But the musicians, the musical geniuses of that era were also involved in the conversation, and they had a lot to contribute to it. It not only in their compositions and in their public and private declarations and conversations about what they felt about the times and government, but even the tuning that was used is also relevant to this broader conversation of how we, the people, are the sovereigns of the land. I'm going to just say one last thing before introducing Mindy, and that is, this conversation and all the other conversations at the Commoner Law Group that we have are really important in this time, because you look around and you see quite a lot of ignorance, and you see people choosing to be subservient to government and to even turn upside down what our founding fathers gave us. People are considering themselves good people when they follow the rules, and they're mistaking morality for doing what the government tells them to do. And then, of course, they extend that same morality to the people around them. So when there are things like mandatory medical interventions or other kinds of draconian decrees that come down from government, health departments, or other branches of government, too often the people just fall in line and do not even know to assert their rights. We need to restore the appeal and the attraction to living free, to order society based on the principle of freedom and sovereignty first, before security and safety. So I'm so grateful to have Mindy with us. I've met Mindy in the realm of politics here in the Bay Area. She's taken time out of her busy campaigning schedule. It's true, she's running for office, and the election on November 5th, voting starts almost a month before. So people are going to start voting for her in a couple of weeks. And I really appreciate that you've taken the time out, because of a priority that you have for really the American experience overall. We'll tell you more about her campaign later, but just to note that she is actively engaged in making this world a better place at various angles. As an educator, she is a music scholar, but she's also now a politician.
Right.
And as you will learn, she's also just a great American, the kind of American you'd want to model yourself after. So, Mindy, if you want to say some more about your past, some more about your credentials, or just how you're feeling today as a way of introducing yourself, but then pretty soon we're just going to jump right into your presentation for us. But thanks everyone for being here to focus on this very important topic.
Well, thank you, Clint, for inviting me and for that great introduction. And hello to everyone. And I'll just say 2 words a little bit about how I got into this. And I'm actually running for Oakland City Council at large to clean up, help to revive Oakland back as a real city again. And the question of classical culture has always been a passion of mine. I'm a classical bassoonist by education. And fortunately, when I was young in graduate school, I met Lyndon LaRouche, who had a political movement who was very concerned about this question of what is it to be in the image of God? What is it to have the creative mind that God gave us? And how does that allow us to transform our universe? So in that collaboration with my passion for music, I did a lot of work over the last 50 years. And what I'm going to do tonight is just try to give you a slice of it. And I'm going to choose to use Mozart as an example. Bach was also involved, J.S. Bach, obviously a little earlier than the American Revolution, but during the time of the Bay Colonies. And it was because of Bach that Mozart was able to develop. And that's true of every great composer, Brahms, Beethoven, Haydn, Verdi, Schumann, Schubert. And inside the classical culture, which I'm not going to do tonight, there is a huge fight because our political enemy, then and now, of the British Empire, and their friends, what I call in the Uni Party today in the United States, they know the question, you had to destroy what the United States was founded on. And it comes from a deep history of Leibniz, the great philosopher Leibniz, which most people don't even realize that Benjamin Franklin was a student of Leibniz. And our part of our Constitution, which says life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that comes directly from Leibniz. So if you wonder why the Enlightenment is our enemy, and it is, and it was deliberately deployed by the British into the United States, as around the world, against this real, for lack of a better word, the real tradition of what makes us in the image of the Creator, as discovered through Plato, as discovered through the Renaissance, as discovered through, and I'll take you through some of the questions in music. So this is why today our nation is under attack culturally. I'm proud to say I'm 72 years old, and looking back to when the assassination of Kennedy happened, and the bringing into the rock, drug, sex counterculture, that was a direct attack against the image of God. And I'm going to take you back now through the musical realm of the fight. And I'm going to do it in 3 parts. One, which will have some musical examples. But first, I want to develop a little bit of the history, just to ground people in the history. This fight of the Enlightenment, and Mozart was an enemy of the Enlightenment. He knew that Voltaire, for example, who was one of his personal arch enemies in Europe, in Paris, when in 1778, Mozart was in Paris. And he was working directly with the networks of the American Revolution. I'll go through that in a second. But I want to read you this one quote from a letter he wrote his father in 1778 from Paris. He said, "Now I have a piece of news for you, which may have already heard, namely the godless arch rascal Voltaire has pegged out like a dog, like a beast. That is his reward." So no love for Voltaire by Mozart. Very clear who the enemy of the Enlightenment and what that was about. And this breaking the question of man in the image of God is to attack the creative principle that God gave only to man. I love my dog, but he's a dog. He makes me happy, but he can't change the universe. He can't discover the principles of the universe and then enhance the quality of life. And that God-given right to us as human beings was very special. And the enemy throughout centuries knew you had to attack that. And that's where Hume, Voltaire, Locke, all these guys, de Maistre, come out of the fight against the principles of that God-given right. And just to make it clear, I just want to read you one more quote. And this is from my favorite quote from David Hume. And this comes from his Wealth of Nations. And think about what he's saying here. It's very important. The care of the universal happiness of all rational and sensible beings is the business of God and not of man. To man is allotted a much humbler department, but one of much more suitable to the weakness of his powers, to the narrowness of his comprehension. The care of his own happiness, of that of his family, his friends, his country. But though we are endowed with a very strong desire to those ends, it's been entrusted to the slow and uncertain determination of our reason to find out the proper means of bringing them about. Nature has directed us to the greater part of these by original and immediate instincts. Hunger, thirst, the passion which unites the two sexes, the love of pleasure, the dread of pain, prompts us to apply these means for their own sake, without any consideration of their tendency to those beneficial ends which the great director of nature intended to produce. Now, he says, the business of God and not of man. Man is not in God's image, is what he's saying. He's saying man is just a beast. You just tend to your little needs and be happy by being a beast. That is the Enlightenment. That is what they tried to thrust in the United States over then and now. And just one more of these guys I just want to read from, because I want to make the point about this creative principle. Then I'm going to go through the history and then we'll go to the music. This is from Joseph de Maistre. He said, man can modify everything within the sphere of his activity, but he creates nothing. Such is his law, in the physical world as in the moral world. You get the idea. I could go on, but I think the point is made. And this is why, just to give a little history of Mozart now and his relationship to the American Revolution, because as we all know, there were Tories in the United States fighting against. You want to say something, Clint? Go ahead.
Yeah, I do. I do want to make sure it's absolutely clear that you're creating like almost a black and white contrast here. I actually studied philosophy. I took a class on Hume. I took a class on Leibniz, and as a young guy, I can tell you sitting here, I don't know if I understood even then the kind of contrast that you're describing or the implications for us today in terms of our governance or how we relate to each other. But I'm just going to give it a try, and please
Sure.
correct me, but it sounds like on one side you have a characterization of humans as divinely created, that we have a special place as God's creation, which is almost incalculable in terms of what we are capable of and what a good life would be, what it means to live a good life, not only individually, but collectively. Whereas the others seem to be eliminating the God factor. It's almost atheistic in the sense that we're just appetites, and either
Right.
we seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that basically that's as simple as it gets. And if you want to explain how to live a good life, it just means getting more pleasure and less pain, not just even for yourself, but even everybody else.
Exactly, exactly. And that was the fight inside the United States when the nation was founded, because those that sympathized with the British Empire sympathized with the Enlightenment, like Jefferson, against George Washington, against Governor Morris, against Ben Franklin, against Hamilton, who wanted us to stay as an agrarian backward society and not as a manufacturing industrial sovereign nation. This was an incredible fight, but that's a whole bigger story, which I won't quite go through tonight. But this was intensely a sovereign nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. How many times do we say the Pledge of Allegiance? And that's what it means. A sovereign nation is about being in the image of God with the creative powers that develop not just a better way of life, but make constant new discoveries. That's why, Kennedy fought for the space program. That's why Trump fought for the space program. The new discoveries. We haven't discovered the universe is very big. God created a big universe. And that's what makes man unique. So this attack I won't go back centuries right now. I'm going to stay on Mozart, but you got it, Clint. That's the issue involved here. And it's very distinct, and they don't teach it that way.
No.
That's the problem. This is a lot of hard work. and I'll just give you a little bit of the history to make it clear. Mozart, when he was in Paris in 1778, and that was his last trip to Paris. They threw him out of Paris after that trip, and they wouldn't let him back in because of his connections to the American Revolution. And he spent time, just to give you some of the history, Mozart spent a lot of time when he was in Paris for 10 days with the home of the estate of de Noailles family, Noaille family, the in-laws of Marquis de Lafayette. And I'm assuming everybody who knows who Marquis de Lafayette is, and his role in the American Revolution. And he worked there with Johann Christian Bach, that was the son of J.S. Bach, at this estate. And these are the pro-American circles in Paris that were supporting the young United States to be born against the British Empire. And so he was directly involved with the Lafayette family, spent time with the Lafayette family. After those 10 days, he found his stuff packed in a coach by the oligarchical circles, not by the French people, not by the thinking powerful forces in France who wanted the American Revolution to succeed and had hoped to have it happen in Paris. But unfortunately, and that's a whole other story, the French Revolution got taken over by the wrong side, and all the great people were killed, and it went to hell and never hasn't recovered yet. But that's a whole other chapter. But just to make the point, Mozart was very connected to these circles. But the oligarchical forces who didn't want to see the United States, didn't want to see France go the way of the United States, knew how precious it was with a genius like Mozart, writing the kind of compositions, uniting with the forces for the American Revolution, what that would mean for Europe and that would mean for the United States to evolve in this way. So just to fast forward the story a little bit to 1782. Now he's back in Vienna, Mozart. And this is the time of the Battle of Yorktown in the American Revolution. And this is the first half of the 1782 period of the French and American success at Yorktown. And so what happens? Mozart is brought into again to these American circles in Vienna. And he's brought in by Chancellor of the State, Count Benzel, who regularly briefed Mozart on the decisions and diplomatic material, sensitive material involving the Pope's trip to see Emperor Joseph, shortly after Yorktown. And it's at that time, Baron von Swieten, who was part of the American faction in Vienna, started a musical circle, which Mozart and Haydn were invited to. Now, why was that so important? Because J.S. Bach, everybody knows J.S. Bach today, but J.S. Bach had been buried and his music buried. And von Swieten was reviving Bach. And he had these salon meetings where they would just study all of Bach's compositions. He brought on all the manuscripts, and Mozart and Haydn would just be in this quartets playing through them. And this gave a burst of energy to the creativity of Mozart because of what Bach had done. And the fugal principle of writing fugues, but not just fugues in and of themselves. And this is tied to something which I'm going to demonstrate musically in a few seconds. But you have to realize that this fight was real, and it coincides with the fight of the American Revolution very directly. And in fact, it was very much at that time of these circles that Baron von Swieten brought together leaders of the American faction within Emperor Joseph's court with, Mozart to tackle the key cultural and scientific issues of the time. And the last thing I want to say on this, because I could go on forever and I don't want to right now, because I don't want to overload people, is that at that time, question of governing your nation, your sovereignty, your right, the consent to govern, right? And this was the fight very much in Europe. The greatest people like Mozart and others at the time, the greatest scientists, looked to the American Revolution to succeed. They wanted to get rid of this oligarchy. And I won't do it tonight, but if you look at Mozart's operas, they're all attacking the oligarchy, every one of them, every one of them. And that was known. And he's also developing, not just attacking, but developing what is the creative spirit. That's embedded in the music. It comes through the way that he composed and the way that that affects the soul and mind of the people who really, now most today, a lot of classical, if you listen to a lot of conductors, I'd say 95% of the conductors today, the 1900s through today, should be put in a box and never heard from. I'd say about 95%. About 5% actually understood the compositional process that Mozart, in this case, unfolded. One of the greatest conductors of our time was Furtwängler, and I encourage people to get a hold of his recordings, or the Amadeus String Quartet. They also are very, very good in their performances. And so this battle that Mozart, getting to meet Bach, and the scientists of the time, art, nation state, and science were not separate. That came in the late 1800s by Carl Savigny, one of the deployments of the oligarchy, to say that art is just emotion, science is all brain, and there's no connection between science, the creative process that makes discoveries in science, and the creative process that makes discoveries in music. It's as if your brain was, cut in half, your mind is cut in half. And that was a deliberate deployment to destroy this method of actual creative discovery. Then what the Enlightenment brought in was, by denying God and this creative process, it said creativity is unknowable. There is no hypothesis, as Newton said. There is no knowability in the human mind of the creative process and knowing of God. Everything's just mechanical. That's what the Enlightenment did. Took out God, took out creativity, and brought in everything's just mechanically organized. I'm sure you've all heard the story, we discovered gravity by an apple falling on somebody's head. Oh, see, it's just a force pulling down. No, actual discoverer of gravity was Kepler, who discovered the ordering of the solar system and coined the solar system. And Newton just plagiarized it, but that's a whole other story too. So now I'm going to go to the music, but I wanted to give you some background, and I hope I'm making it clear. If not, please let me know, because I'm trying to present it in a as clear a way as I can.
You're doing great. You're doing great. I really appreciate it. I actually am feeling my heart filled with a new connection to my higher power. This is wonderful. I feel like I'm sitting in church and being reintroduced in a new way to my God. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, it is, because the principle that governs all real classical music, real classical performance, is the question of agape. And as it says in Corinthians 1:13, if you have not agape, not charity in the actual Greek, it's agape. And that passion of agape, not eros, but agape, is what governs. Just to make the point before I go to Mozart, how explicit this is. I'm sure people have heard of Leonard Bernstein, the conductor. I won't tell you my personal thoughts. I want you to discover it yourself when I hear him speak. They did this whole new movie on Netflix, The Conflicted Life of Bernstein. But he composed a piece called Candide. I don't know how familiar everybody is with Candide. Candide was a book by Voltaire, attacking Leibniz's concept of optimism and why this is the best of all possible worlds. And how Leibniz saw and understood, even if there's something bad that happens, the universe is lawful because of God. And if you know God's principles and you know God, you can fix the problems. I want you to hear, this is Leonard Bernstein. He was the conductor of the New York Philharmonic. He's in England giving this performance of his Candide. And before he performs it, he turns around to the audience to give this 5-minute discussion. So here we go.
Surprise. My dear friends, I hear you thinking, Here comes the old professor to lecture us again. But I promise to be brief and only by way of introduction. The reason I feel I should say a few words, if you'll pardon my croaky voice, I too have the English disease, like so many of you, the royal flu. The reason I feel I ought to say something is that for more than 30 years, 35 years to be exact, people have asked me, why Candide? Whither and whence Candide? I thought I might answer a bit more clearly by speaking not only as the composer of this work, but as an everyday observer of history, like anyone here, but particularly of that period of history known as the Age of Enlightenment, roughly the 18th century. And that was the century in which Voltaire lived, wrote, and had extraordinary influence. His masterpiece was a tough, skinny little novella called Candide, which inspired the playwright Lillian Hellman and me to have a bash at it musically. Voltaire's book was actually entitled Candide or Optimism, it being a viciously satirical attack on a prevalent philosophical system known as optimism, which was based on the rather indigestible writings of a certain Gottfried Wilhelm von Leibniz and popularized by our own beloved Alexander Pope. For example, in this great line from his essay on man, one truth is clear, whatever is right. Now, according to Leibniz, whose ideas Pope was lyricizing, if we believe in a creator, then he must be a good creator, and the greatest of all possible creators, and therefore could have created only the best of all possible worlds. In other words, everything that is right. Granted that in this world the innocent are mindlessly slaughtered and that crime mostly goes unpunished, that there is disease and death and poverty, but if we could only see the whole picture, the divine universal plan, then we would understand that whatever happens is for the best. Thus spake Leibniz. Naturally, Voltaire found this idea absurd every day of his life, but particularly on that day in 1755, when all of Lisbon, Portugal, exploded in an earthquake, and uncountable numbers of people were drowned, crushed, buried alive, exterminated. Now, if Leibniz was right, said Voltaire, then God is just playfully spraying his flit gun and down go 1 million mosquitoes at random, haphazardly. Well, the Lisbon disaster was the last straw for Voltaire and provoked him to write Candide, in which he lashed out against all established authority, royal, military, or mercantile, but most of all at the power of the church, which actually was burning heretics at the time, burning them alive to prevent earthquakes. In other words, says Voltaire, sectarian religion is always an incitement to conflict, and optimism, as a strict belief, therefore breeds complacency, induces lethargy, inhibits the human power to change, to progress, to rise against injustice, or to create anything that might contribute to a genuinely better world. During my incredibly extensive researches for this lecture, which you are now suffering, I came across the following quite succinct summing up of the whole Voltaireism. Quote, Voltaire was acting as an eclectic who had synthesized the ideas of the Stoics, the Epicureans, the skeptics. Oh, the hell with it. Let's play the overture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Mouthful.
That says it all. That's why he should be in the box of the 95% that never should be heard from, or his music, because that's how he interprets and conducts music, with that worldview. And I hope to make the point with that it's not accidental, these attacks. People think it's academic. It's not academic. It's the living edge of how the oligarchy, in all forms, in all centuries, from the Roman Empire through the British Empire, through the central bankers today, use culture to suppress people, to suppress their creative process, so that they won't have a real republic, won't have a real nation, which has a moral and undefining. So you can find that on YouTube, by the way. I've heard it a zillion times, and every time it's still like, whoa. Who today, if you went and took a survey on the streets and asked people who is Leibniz, how many people would know Leibniz?
Yes, at the same time, that question is a constant theological question that even children in catechism today or in Bible study will ask, if God is good, then why so much suffering? Why so much unnecessary tragedy?
And that's what Leibniz was answering very directly. And it is a question that, to do the good, to be the good, takes work. It takes understanding what it is to be in the image of the Creator. That is the question today. Are we going to do enough good to ensure that we win this fight? That's why I'm running for office, crazy at 72 years of age, but that's why we have to succeed. That's the basis of a republic. It doesn't work if the citizens aren't on the highest level of thinking and fighting for these kind of creative principles against this oligarchical control. So with that, I'm going to jump to the music, and I want to demonstrate a few principles to you, musical principles that were very known then and not so known today. This is the work that I did very much with my friend Linda LaRouche. What you see before you is the musical scale. Now, Clint did mention earlier the tuning question, and this is very related to this vocal registration question. These vocal registers were actually discovered by Leonardo da Vinci and has a long history, but all instrumental music is based on the singing voice principle. This was explicit by Bach. This would continue through Mozart, Haydn, all the ones I mentioned before. There are 6 species of singing voice: bass, baritone, tenor, contralto, alto, and soprano. Now, the actual tuning of classical music should be, you've all heard probably of A440 at A440 hertz. When the note A, you tune at 440 hertz. That was the standard in all musical orchestras. Now it's actually up to A452 in some orchestras. This tuning fight existed throughout the Renaissance period, existed to Bach, and Bach established the tuning is A equals 432. In other words, it was lower, not higher at A440. It was A432, C256. Now, why is that so important? Because God created us with a human singing voice. Just the way he created the solar system. It's not arbitrary how the planets go around in their orbits. There's a lawfulness to the universe, and it's up to us to discover that lawfulness and increasing lawfulness. And in other words, the universe is not entropic, it's actually negentropic. It's going to more creativity. And so the natural singing voice registers, which go back to, as I said, Da Vinci, is that each voice has at least 3 registers. And as you can see them by the color. The red is everybody's first register. Everybody's voice has a second register, which is in this yellow. The third register here, blue, is the third register. We're getting higher in the scale. And some voices, like the tenor, like the alto, and like the soprano, even have a 4th register, which is even higher. If any of you have ever heard the Queen of the Night aria and Mozart's Magic Flute, she's up here in that 4th register. So the first register is your lowest registers. That's why it's showing you this keyboard, the notes here. So this is the lowest. Now, every voice has a point where it switches from the first register to the second register. And as you can see, it's different for every voice. And then there's a point where the second register ends and the third register begins. And then there's the point when the fourth. Now, that is what's known as bel canto, singing. That is the natural ordering in which all true classical music is actually composed, instrumentally also, with these registers in mind. And why this is important, why the lower tuning is important. Because think about it, if you raise the tuning, what happens to those register shifts? Take the F here, which is the end of the first register of a soprano, and the beginning of the F sharp is the beginning of her second register. If the tuning is higher, you've now changed the note. It's not in the same place. And this is what was understood and behind actually creating the kind of dialogue, the polyphony in a composition, was based on the interrelationship. It'd be like taking poetry or the spoken language, and you suddenly just arbitrarily just said, hello, here I am, a little incoherent, right? And so there is a relationship to the polyphony, which bears on the composition. This was known. Bach made this alive. He brought it in that the tuning is well-tempered. I'm not going to go through, I don't think I could go through it, not equal-tempered, but well-tempered, which meant that relationships are not fixed. And it's based on this singing principle of these voices and the lower tuning. In fact, when Verdi, the composer Verdi, in the late 1800s, who wrote the magnificent operas he did, when he was trying to unify Italy, which was not yet a nation state, he actually became a legislator and tried to legislate the tuning to be A432. He didn't get it passed, unfortunately, but he tried. But I just wanted to ground a little bit why the tuning and why the vocal registers, why it's not arbitrary. Now I want to share with you a little bit of music, just to make it concrete. I'm going to use a piece which I did a lot of work on. Mr. LaRouche had recommended that I look at Mozart's piece called Mozart's Ave Verum. And it's about the life and death of Christ. That's what it's about. It's all of 24 or 26 measures. It's the shortest piece you've ever heard. Yet it's one of the most compact pieces. He wrote it pretty much right before he died. And it's what he does, and this is an article I wrote on it. It's called A Crucial Proof of Mozart's Discovery, a Short Pedagogical Exercise in Musical Memory. And I want to just get you familiar with the words so you know what it is. Now, Ave verum corpus, natum de Maria Virgine, vere passum immolatum, in cruce pro homine, cuius latus perforatum, unde fluxit et sanguine, est nobis pregustatum in mortis examine. Hail, hail, true body, born of the Virgin Mary, truly having suffered sacrifice on the cross on behalf of man, whose pierced side trickled water and blood, be thou for the foretaste in the test of death. Now, what I'm going to play you in a minute is two different conductors of this piece. One is me at the lower tuning, and one is Leonard Bernstein at the higher tuning. And I also want to say something about how Mozart composed this, because the question really, think about what is he posing to the listener? What is he posing to the musician? Christ has died. And be thou for us a foretaste in the test of death. Can you go to your own death, your own immortality, with a smile on your face, knowing that you have done everything in the image of God to have furthered the development, in this case, of our sovereign nation and humanity? And this was a very important, this is 1791, roughly, I think it's 91 or 92, that he composes this. The world is in a crisis. The nation's in a crisis. The United States Constitution was just ratified shortly before that. And he was knowledgeable of the battles around us. Europe was in a crisis, in a fight. And so this is why real classical composition is the sovereign nation state principle. It's not separate as they would have you think today. And what Mozart did, the Ave Verum Corpus goes back to the 1500s as a hymn. But Mozart adds in a second Ave. He goes, Ave, Ave, hail, hail. Now he does that for a specific reason, which I think it would be too technical to go through, because he's developing what he learned from Bach, I call the Lydian principle. What he does musically is so revolutionary, Mozart. It's sort of summing up everything of his life in this 24, 26 measure piece and posing this question to the population. And he knew the failure of the French Revolution. He saw it with his own eyes. He knew it failed, and he knew we were at a crossroads. Now, you're going to see the Bernstein conducting. And I just want to point out one other thing. Their English translation is not Hail, Hail, True Body, born of the Virgin Mary. Their English translation is Hail, True Flesh. Think about that. There's a big difference between Hail, Hail, True Body, born of the Virgin Mary to Hail, True Flesh. Then when it says, where he's truly having suffered sacrifice on the cross on behalf of man, the Bernstein translation is broken on the cross. Broken. Christ was not broken. And then where it says the test of death, which is a very ennobled expression, he says trial of death. Trial of death. It was a test. It's different. This was not a trial. I just wanted to point those few things out. Now I'm going to go to the musical example. Don't worry if you don't get it at the first hearing, because it does take several hearings to adjust your mind to it. And the difference you're going to see is I'm conducting it with amateur singers, not professionals, singing at the lower tuning with the register shifts in mind as composed in the actual piece by Mozart. And we have a piano, not an orchestra. Bernstein has a professional chorus, full orchestra, so don't get caught up in the differences of that. So first I'm going to play you this one. I'm going to play the Bernstein and then go back and forth a couple of times to hear the difference if you want, because it's going to probably take that. But I don't want to say much now. I just want to go right to the Bernstein. Could you hear the difference? I don't know how well it comes across over the internet.
I could definitely hear the sound, but maybe some other people have. Is it something I'm supposed to hear in my ear, or is it also in my body? Because I didn't actually discern a difference physically. You're saying the Bernstein one, everything is higher, correct?
Yeah, it's higher, but the way you would hear it more without going back and forth and a lot of times is you'll hear it in the way that Bernstein phrases and the white sound. There's a difference of what you're going to hear, not so much as the pitch itself, as the poetry, as how it affects your soul. To me, it's like a complete white sound. In other words, it's like a monotone sound that you're hearing. Somebody wrote in, the 440 feels disconnected and disembodied. You're right. Thank you, Jason. You're right. Yes. So it's more in the color. If you hear it enough and you're used to it enough, you can hear the difference. With my bassoon, the bassoon has a piece that comes out like that. It's a vocal. And I have one that allows me to play at the 432. And I have one that allows me to play on the same instrument at the 440. And then you would hear it. But you can hear it if you just go back and forth enough. And that's a little hard, I think, over the internet to quite get it. But I think that's the way you're going to intone it, not so much pitch-wise.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for that. And thanks everybody for their attention. This is just extraordinary conversation. I'm rapt. I'm just so impressed. I'm always happy personally when I learn something I didn't know. And that has been my experience learning the laws with the Commoner Law Group experts of all kinds. I'm just so happy to be filling in this major gap of mine in terms of American history, American law, and to learn this new angle is so rewarding. And I thank you for bringing us this very, I don't know how to say it. It's inspiring. It's renewing. And I feel so great that there's something about this conversation that refreshes me and brings me back to harmony. You know, there's something to that harmonic and how everything in our modern era seems to be disharmonic, seems to almost be designed to create internal and external conflicts everywhere. So again, thank you very much for bringing us back to this divine state.
Yeah, in fact, Brian, thank you. No, I love it. It's anytime. Brian put in the chat, the first presentation feels more connected to the love harmonic. Yes. A connection to the world maker. Yes, exactly right. Exactly right. It's really a whole tuning system. It's not just a pitch of a note. It's the whole system of which includes the whole vocal registration question. Yeah.
At what point in time did this new tuning become pretty much standard? What was the time frame?
During the Nazi period.
Oh, so it's just less than 100 years ago.
Yeah, no, it's the battle on the tuning. But just to be clear, this goes back to the Renaissance. In the Renaissance, you had, 5 or 6 different tunings. It was part of the political fight. Then, even to J.S. Bach's time, there was just tuning, mean tuning, equal tuning, and well-tempered tuning. And well-tempered has been the actual tuning that coheres with how Kepler actually discovers the ordering of the universe and his solar system ordering, rather not the universe, but the solar system. So Bach intervened and said, look, because Bach was, I believe he must have known Kepler's work. I can't prove it, but I think the scientific community be there. He established and said, no, it's well tempering, not equal. Equal means every note is equally divided. Well tempering means you have this in-betweenness, which you shape with the coloring, which is what I try to do when I conduct. And once Bach established that, that's, in the whole question of composition with that, then it was a battle until Mozart. Then Mozart brought it back again. And so there was always this battle of tunings, going on. You had 440 back then too. Orchestras were playing at 440, depending which city you went to. Today, there's no professional orchestra plays at 432. They play 440 or higher. There are groups that do specifically play at 432. I've worked with orchestras that have done it, but they're not, quote, like the New York Philharmonic or the Boston Symphony, or anything like that. So it's become known. It is a known thing, and it is a community of people who do play at it. Like the singers you heard when I was conducting, they're all political. None of them are trained, except for the pianist, who's my good friend, Miha. She's a trained musician, but everybody else, learned it. Actually, this is one of the things in the LaRouche movement we did, is we built this love for the classical idea to be part of our political organizing.
Yes, and we're going to go, Brian.
May
Go
I,
ahead,
Brian?
Yes, thank you.
You can hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Mindy, what I'd like to ask you is that Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, that one, it is tuned, I believe, as I feel it, it's tuned to 432.
Well, it depends what performance. Maybe you've heard a performance of it at 432. Most orchestras are playing, but I think I know what you're getting at with Tchaikovsky. He's an interesting character because it does have a very warm kind of feeling to it. It depends on the orchestra, Brian, that you heard performing it.
When I heard it, and I was shown that Swan Lake contains within it a message from Tchaikovsky to us about our connection to the world maker. And it is it's within his piece. And when I heard it, I can't remember the conductor, but when I heard it at that time, I felt the connection that he was trying to make. So it must have been tuned to 432 or something that I connected with. I just wanted to,
But that's important what you're doing, Brian.
Thank you.
I'll just answer your question a little bit more on that. There's the conductor I mentioned before, Wilhelm Furtwängler, who was incredible. He actually stayed in Nazi Germany and fought Hitler and actually helped a lot of Jews escape. And, Hitler almost was going to put him in a concentration camp, but he escaped to Switzerland. And Wilhelm Furtwängler. Now, his orchestras played at 440, but because he was such a good conductor who actually understood the compositional principle, he could, even at the higher tuning of 440, have you believe it was tuned down, because he actually knew how to do this well tempering, how to bring out the actual in between the notes, not literal on the note. And so even though he was conducting at 440, he had the effect as if it was lower. And he's a phenomenal conductor. And actually, my friend Mr. LaRouche, when he came out of the military, he was in World War II in the Indian Burma Theater. And he was in the, what do you call it, where the servicemen would go to hang out. He found a recording of Tchaikovsky's, I think it was 4th or 6th Symphony, conducted by Furtwängler. And he fell in love with it because it was Tchaikovsky as Tchaikovsky meant it in the hands of Furtwängler. So I think that's something like what you experienced there, Brian. Yeah, thanks for that.
Hey, thank you very much.
Anna.
Hi, Mindy, and hi,
Anna.
Thank you so much for doing this. So first question, the white noise and in between notes. So just a little brief, I'm a singer, I'm a classically trained singer. And for a while, I've been meaning to tune my piano to 432 and I currently perform in 440, obviously, because that's the standard. That's what, if you want to play with musicians, that's what you're going to play. And tune my guitar to that. And I've heard some interesting, there was this guy who has his own sort of podcast or whatever, and he tunes all of his pianos to 432, and he actually said that, because the piano is not tuned evenly, right? You kind of have it has to be by intervals and slightly out of tune,
right?
So it actually makes more sense to tune it to 432 because it's more in tune in 432 than it is in 440. So I thought that was interesting. Right. So maybe that's, if you can elaborate on that. But my biggest question is, you mentioned the white noise and in between notes. What do you mean by that?
Okay, good. That's one of definitely tuning. My piano's at 432. Okay. And as a singer, you'll notice the differences. The difference between the white noise and the in between. And actually I've worked with singers who have actually done the great Cappuccilli. He's now deceased. He was a great Italian opera singer. He did examples of singing Verdi arias at the higher tuning and then singing the same aria at the lower tuning. And you can, where the voice passes, you can see the complete difference. In well tempering, as Bach really brought this forward, in the real universe, as God created it, it's not mechanical fixed relationships. I'll just give you an example. Let's take the interval of a C to E, a third, okay? Now, C to E in one context can mean one thing, but C to E in another context means something else. And so you have to tune. In well tempering, you have the ability to direct your tuning to shape the actual content of the actual idea. So the way the intervals are tuned is a little different, and it allows that kind of flexibility. So if you have the lower tuning with that kind of flexibility, then, you know, like for a string player, like a violinist or a singer, it's a little harder to do on a woodwind because it's a little bit more built in. But as a singer or a violinist, if you need to darken the sound because of the content of the idea, you can do that with your voice. You can do that with a string instrument, because directionality in music means something. And an inversion in music means something. It's not all going up and going down means two different things.
Yes.
So you have to shape it differently. White sound, like what I hear in the Bernstein recording, is it's like a monotone. It's just pure white. It is no, they don't have the vibrato. Part of the bel canto singing coming from the Renaissance, from the vocal registers, the vibrato is very important, is helping to shape the actual idea. White noise, a white sound, is just, it's like a monotone, which does, you know, it never changes. It's just all very, you know, just empty. You don't have the connection between the support and the register shifts, so it's devoid of all that. And if you listen very carefully to the Bernstein, you hear that you don't have any of that coloring, you don't have any of that shifting. And when I say in between the notes, it's the way that Furtwängler actually understood the relationships of the ideas in the composition, so that he's never playing literal. If you listen to recordings, let's take a conductor like Toscanini or Von Karajan or Bernstein doing a Beethoven symphony. They're literalists. Toscanini, Von Karajan, they're literalists. They play on the note. Da 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 dum, da 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 dum. But for Furtwängler or a true artist, you're never playing da 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 dum. There is an idea in da 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 dum, da 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 dum. So you know that idea is being developed. In my paper that I wrote on this Ave Verum, the concept is that the future determines your present actions. Your future, what do you want for the future? How does that govern your, well, it's the same method in real classical composition. You don't just start at the beginning and write the composition this way. You have an idea in your mind, and you're unfolding an idea which is living. It's not in the notes. It's actually in between the notes that the idea of the composer lies. The notes are just a sort of like a mapping, a directionality, but the understanding of the mind of the composer and the intention of the composer. How did he compose? How did he, that's the in-between. And today, unfortunately, that quality is lost. And that's why I go back to Furtwängler. If you compare Furtwängler conducting the same piece as a Von Karajan or a Bernstein or a Toscanini, you'll see that in between, that shaping of an idea. Think of a four-voice fugue. Does the idea lie in any one of the voices themselves?
No, it's the relationship between.
Right. And that's the in-between we're talking about in every composition that's really truly classical, even if it's not a fugue.
May I, one more question? So as far as I understand, at the time of Mozart, Bach, and all of them, each conductor, composer would literally pick their own tuning. So there was no standard tuning as far as I understand. They would tune, each orchestra would be tuned differently. And so was this sort of like, I'm just going to call it a battle between 440 and 432, or was it just kind of composers and conductors just kind of like, I feel like tuning it to, I don't know, 420 something or you know, 220 something. What do you know about that history?
Well, there was a fight during the time of Bach where some people actually went below 432 and tuned lower. But see, again, just like tuning higher, God created the natural singing human voice with the registers that we have. If you tune too low, you destroy that. If you tune too high, you destroy that. Now, the question of the tuning,
I've always had this feeling that we were actually meant naturally as singers to sing in 432. That's why
Right.
a lot of singers are a little flat.
right, 432 is the actual tuning. You're right, Anna. And see, the question of tuning is completely political. The oligarchy who want to destroy the British Empire, the oligarchy of the emperors of Europe, and that's what made Emperor Joseph so different, because he was really pro-American Revolution. He was pro working with Mozart. But most of them, it was a political question, not so much like the artists. Like I wasn't going to go into this, but I'll say it real quick. Take somebody, and I may offend some people if I do, forgive me. Take somebody like Rameau. Rameau, the composer Rameau, lived at the same time as J.S. Bach. Rameau was completely controlled by the oligarchy. He developed the idea of chordal theory. He wrote the book on harmony. Everything is, there are fixed chords in the universe. 1, 4, 5, 1, whatever, you know. And Bach, who represented this universal understanding of the real principles, said, no, it's not fixed chords. Chords don't exist. That's the mechanical world, Rameau, and that's consciously created and developed. It's not accidental. Rameau didn't just do it on his own. He may have come up with it on his own, but he's part of a particular school of political force. And the same thing with Franz Liszt. Franz Liszt and Wagner were not just nice composers. No, Franz Liszt was at war with Schumann and Brahms and Schubert, who came from the Beethoven, Mozart, Bach's tradition of what it is to be in the image of the creator God, who were fighting for sovereign nation states. Brahms was fighting for Germany to become a sovereign nation of the big names. It was a complete political battle, and they understood it, and there was no accident. And the creation of the Romantic movement was an extension of the Enlightenment stretched to its end against Brahms, against Schubert, against Schumann, because of what they represented in the form of this sovereign nation state principle, this conception of man. So the tuning going higher was politically driven. That was politically driven. And then by the time of the Nazis, 440 was standard. When I was in music school, you know, I started bassoon when I was 13 years age. From junior high school to college to I dropped out of graduate school. I couldn't take it anymore. But all you played was 440. I didn't even know there was 432 until I met Lyndon LaRouche and worked with him. I didn't know that whole universe because you never taught it the way the history is taught. I was taught everything in chordal theory you can imagine, but I rejected it. Talk about rejecting mandates. I had to reject chordal theory. To me, it made no sense. How could that kind of world, it didn't make any sense to me. I didn't know what was right yet, but I knew what wasn't right. So just to answer your question, Anna, that's where I would go.
Got
if
it.
it helps. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mindy.
Great. Keep
Okay.
singing. That's 432.
Thank you.
Great. Good.
Yeah, I'm just realizing that I've had the good fortune of hearing two different people who are with us today sing. Anna was singing in Golden Gate Park on Sunday. It was very, very enjoyable. And Lisa Tao sang in a chorus in Berkeley last year.
Wow.
And you got to, so this is just wonderful. And it's so great to see you again, David.
My friend David Campbell. I know David well. I didn't know he was part of your group.
David's a regular. Yeah, so happy to see you again.
Get on every chance I get. Hello, Clint and Mindy. Good to.
Hi, David.
I wish I could be seen. I'm driving, so not to tempt fate.
Okay.
Video, but really intrigued by the conversation. Mindy, if you've not written a book, you could or should on maybe harmonics and politics, and spirituality for that matter. So maybe give that some thought. But
I've been wanting to write it for about 3 years, but I keep running
Excellent.
for office instead. I do have to, after this campaign, sit down and write. I've written a lot of articles, short articles, but I do want to write a book, David, absolutely. I may
good.
have to need your help.
You can put me on the short list of buyers. Happy to help however I can.
Okay.
So I had an observation around language and then a question, and I heard the words of discord, disharmony, and dissonance that so often we hear not only in music but in our culture, the rancor of discourse, let's say altogether. Two other words come to mind that get used strategically, unfortunately, and that's discontinuity and ingenuity. And so, although those are framed in dis, or kind of the maladaptive forms of language, we get to through your education and your organizing work, Mindy, for example, we get to focus on the opposite of those words. So, for example, we don't hear sonnet very much, but certainly sonic is a derivative of that, but we could focus on chord or being in accordance, and we can certainly focus on harmony and continuity. And the opposite, I guess, of disingenuity would be to be what? Ingenuous, which would be something like something that would be along the lines of intelligence and or full of integrity. So those are some observations on language. But the question is, not being certainly appreciating music all of my life, but not being technically trained, I'm wondering how well humans hear separation throughout the spectrum. So you were focusing on 432. Without ear or equipment, would we be able to hear 430, 425, or 410, or 400, or if we go up the scale, would we hear 440, 450, 460? We understand that animals and dogs in particular, say, have a refined sense of sound or auditory capability and maybe even the higher pitches, but what are some of the human considerations around spectrum and scale and the ability to separate and or be influenced by subtle changes in frequency that we might not understand or hear at some level, but at a deeper level we're being affected by?
Yeah, let's take the question of the higher tuning. This was very, as the orchestras went higher and higher, and particularly a lot of the European orchestras, they go for it's what you got with Berlioz. He was a composer at the late 1800s, early 1900s. The sound gets more brilliant. See what got ditched to destroy the real spirituality of the real classical principle was to go for a brilliant sound, a more brilliant sound, and the higher the pitch, the more brilliant it was getting. And you hear that. You may not recognize what the pitch is, but you will hear it in the brilliance and and then also virtuosity. Virtuosity came in to replace it. So the more fantastic you play, the more like Paganini or something, or whatever, I just saw the other day an opera that was being done in San Francisco called The Maiden something or other. I mean, sick opera. And I'm sure, the subject matter was sick as it was, but I wanted to hear a little bit of the music, but I couldn't find it. Maybe it's not up yet. But the singer, the soprano who was singing the lead role, she said this is the most difficult thing she ever sang, and she would break down crying in rehearsals. Because I'm sure it's all over the place. It's probably very, high pitched. So you would hear the pushing of it up higher was to create the brilliant sound. And that goes with the compositions that were being composed for it at the time. Does that
to try to be impressive and try to, you know, like having, again, from the point of view of we're just appetites and pleasure and pain, you want to give people the most, you know, like a sugary treat, something completely stimulating and awe-inspiring, but without the connection to the divine source. You're just like, wow,
Yeah,
thrilling, zing, bang, boom.
yeah,
And people, yeah, kind of like
exactly.
pop music today, people just come for the entertainment, the stimulation.
Yeah, and just what you exactly, Clint. And David, just to your question on language, look, this was deliberately done. There was a movement directly deployed by British intelligence, by the oligarchy, by these guys to really destroy the sovereignty of. This is the same time they brought in the Federal Reserve, the FBI, the IRS. There was a direct move to create language like with Ezra Pound in so-called poetry of Ezra Pound. So it's this disengaged, erotic, so they consciously destroyed the language of and the poetry to become basically, you want to put down anything you want, it's okay. And that was done to language at the same time it was done to music, at the same time science was attacked. And that was deliberate. So your correlation to language is definitely right on, David.
Fascinating. Thank you, Mindy.
It's a particular movement at that time in history. If you look up Ezra Pound, you'll find it.
Will do. Thank you.
Yeah, great, David. Great to see you again.
Really good to hear you, Mindy. See you soon.
All right. Yes. Thanks, David. I do want to invite people to check out Commoner Law Group's other special presentations on our YouTube channel. All right, Portia, how's it going?
Great, great. Greetings, everyone. I am
Greetings.
delighted to be listening in on this conversation. Very exciting, really thrilling. I'm so impressed with Mindy's knowledge and history, although I'm not a classic buff or a buff of classic music or anything. I do enjoy it very, very much. And I was trying to discern the difference and the nuances that she was referring us to and listening to the two versions. And definitely you could see the difference in terms of, from my ear anyway, in terms of the advancement in the instruments and the more theatrical sounding performance of that of was it Bach?
The
As
Mozart.
Mozart, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
as opposed to when Mindy was leading her, which they sounded absolutely amazing to me as well. So, but anyway, I just wanted to say thank you for coming on. I love learning. I love that you're such a history buff. I'm a bit of a history buff myself, and those little tidbits about Newton and the apple, and certainly what's gone on in the French Revolution. I would love for you to teach me history. I love it. I love it. I love it because there's so much that we don't know that has been twisted and has been told to us completely different from the actual facts of what truly went on. And I think that was a part of the shifting that you're talking about with regards to the music and the scale. It's very much planned and deliberate, I feel, and orchestrated as they lead us more and more away from our higher self, from the supreme being, that which we refer to as God, and pull us more and more to this sort of a secular, robotic, humanoid, or whatever the proper terminology is, where it takes away our divinity and who we are. But Voltaire is very much venerated in society, and I'm getting a different view on him from your point of view. And I find it fascinating because I've always, he's thought he was a proponent of Christianity and free speech, and none of that is actually true.
No, Portia, none of that's true. And it was a big battle between him and Leibniz at that time in Europe. He was against the idea of what really it is to be in the image of God. And
Wow.
he was, I mean, that's why the enemy promotes people like Voltaire and Hume and Locke and says, that's our heritage. No, it's not our heritage.
They constantly flip everything on its head and have you believing one thing and it's totally the antithesis of what is actually truth. And that's what I find fascinating. That's why I think history is so important for us to learn and grasp and understand, and true history anyway, not the one that's told by the victors, obviously. So, but anyway, I want to say thank you. This was very pleasurable.
All right, everyone. Thanks for being here. And we can all open our mics. You know, this is such a sacred space. We're heading out and we want to definitely see you and thank you. So if you care to open your mic and, you know, put some blessings on this space, thank Mindy, thank our creator, whatever you feel moved to as we head out. Just tons of appreciation for me. And I've just gained so much personally from being here, and I hope you have too. So unmute your mic and go ahead and just spontaneously shout out whatever's on your heart or
And
mind.
thank you so much. I love being with all of you.
Thank you so much, Mindy.
Thank you, Anna.
Highly
It was great.
appreciated. Thank you.
Many,
touch.
many blessings. Thank you.
And
Yes,
thank
me
you,
too.
everybody.
Clint.
Blessings
Great
and love to you all.
conversation.
Thank you all.
Thank you. I love it.
Take care.
Love
Be
you
well.
all.
Blessings.
Bless you.
Peace, love, and light.
Great. Thank you, Clint. Thanks, everyone. It was
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Clint.
You're welcome. Peace,
Thank you.
everyone. Peace
Thank
and
you.
love.
Peace and love, right?
Peace and
Agape.
love.